Order, please. We'll call today's session to order. Before we do the daily routine, I'm going to recognize the Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with your indulgence and the indulgence of the House, I wish to make a statement. I want to provide clarification around a remark I made in this House yesterday during question period. The Honourable Member from Clare asked questions of the Minister of Finance in English, and the Minister responded in French only. When I rose to start the next question, I suggested I would ask a question everyone would understand. Mr. Speaker, my comment was made in a lighthearted manner and not one that was intended to offend. I respect both official languages, and in my capacity as Minister of Education, I worked closely with the CSAP, the Acadian School Board, to foster and expand French education. Mr. Speaker, I meant no harm by my comment. I realize it may have been misinterpreted and considered offensive by some members of this Assembly or to others in the Acadian community. And with having said that, I hereby retract that statement and respectfully request the understanding of the House. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The Honourable Member from Richmond.
Monsieur le Président, je voulais juste prendre cette occasion comme président de la section Nouvelle-Écosse de l'Assemblée parlementaire de la francophonie de remercier la chef du Parti conservateur pour avoir clarifié ses commentaires. Je veux l'assurer que c'était très clair pour moi que ce n'était pas son intention de vouloir faire des remarques négatives envers les parlementaires francophones ici à l'Assemblée. Je sais que pendant son temps comme ministre d'Éducation, que c'était une grande amie de la communauté acadienne et francophone ici en Nouvelle-Écosse. Mais je pense que le point qu'elle soulève est le fait que quand le ministre des Finances a répondu en français, que vous-même, comme président de l'Assemblée, vous n'avez pas compris ces commentaires. La majorité des membres ici à l'Assemblée ne l'ont pas compris. Et ça, c'est un problème qui existe ici à l'Assemblée, que c'est le temps d'adresser une fois pour faire sûr que ça n'arrive plus dans le futur. Speaker, as the President of Nova Scotia section of the French Parliamentarians Association, I want to commend the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party for offering clarification of her remarks. I can assure her that I, nor do I think any of the Acadian members of the legislature, took offence to her comments, but I do realize that the media did pick up on them, and I appreciate her making it clear what the point she was making. And she raises a valid point here in that when the Minister of Finance responded yesterday, I would submit that neither you, Mr. Speaker, or the majority of members of this chamber understood his comments. And I think that's the problem that we have here in this legislature that needs to be addressed, and that the time has come for us to be able to address that. And I certainly hope that, as Speaker, that you will take actions to be able to ensure that our rights as Acadian members and Francophones to speak French in this legislature be respected, in the sense that all of our colleagues and all members, and yourself included, can understand those comments when they are being made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and certainly those comments I can take under advisement. Thank you. We'll move on now to the daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. The Honourable Member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are in day 12 of the sitting legislature, 12 days of broken promises by the government opposite. Mr. Speaker, what brought this petition before the House is a headline that read last year, Dexter says he'd keep Tory promises, which we know, Mr. Speaker, has been broken every day since. So, Mr. Speaker, the prayer reads, we, the residents of Cumberland County, implore that Premier Darrell Dexter keep his word and build a correctional facility in Cumberland County. Mr. Speaker, this petition is signed by 58 people, bringing it to a total of 825, and I've fixed my signature.
The petition is tabled. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a petition which the heading on it is Petition to the Legislature Say No to Tax Increases. The operative clause reads, we, the undersigned, petition the Legislature to preserve businesses and jobs by not increasing taxes, balance the books over the medium term by rolling back the massive spending increases of recent years. Mr. Speaker, this petition is signed by 11 individuals, mainly the owner, operator, and employees of Burke Brothers General Contracting in River Bourgeois, Richmond County, and I have affixed my signature.
The petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Volunteerism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas more than 70 volunteers were recognized on April the 12th at the 36th Annual Provincial Volunteer Awards, and whereas each year, Recreation Nova Scotia and the Volunteerism Division of the Department of Health Promotion and Protection recognize these volunteers and the 500,000 other Nova Scotians that so generously give of their time, skills, and experience to improve the lives of Nova Scotians. And whereas volunteers are an integral part of the social and economic fabric of Nova Scotia, providing essential services such as emergency response, coaching and sport leadership, educational support, mentoring, and countless other services. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate all nominees and recipients of the 36th Annual Provincial Volunteer Awards, acknowledge the hard work, dedication, and goodwill that that Nova Scotian volunteers give every day, and encourage more volunteerism across our province. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Thank you. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Acadian Sea Plants Limited, Cornwallis Division, recently received the inaugural Lieutenant Governor's Persons with Disabilities Employer Partnership Award, and whereas the company was given the Provincial Business Award for recognizing the value of employing persons with disabilities and its commitment to youth, middle-aged persons with disabilities, and the community, and whereas the award was accepted by Louis DeVoe, Chairman and Founder of Acadian Sea Plants Limited, who also serves as a volunteer member of the Immigration Advisory Council. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate management and staff of Acadian Sea Plants Limited for their commitment to accommodating persons with disabilities in the workforce. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am reading this motion on behalf of the Honourable Minister of African Nova Scotian Affairs. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas several African Nova Scotian organizations are celebrating milestone anniversaries, and whereas the Black Educators Association is celebrating 40 years, the Indigenous Black and Mi'kmaq program at Dalhousie University Schultz School of Law is celebrating 20 years, and the Halifax Community YMCA is celebrating 60 years. And whereas all these groups have one thing in common, and that is in assisting and supporting the African Nova Scotian community, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House join me in congratulating these groups on their milestones and recognizing the members who have tirelessly served and continue to serve the African Nova Scotian communities through these organizations. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sergeant Mark Gallagher, former spokesman for the Nova Scotia RCMP, was volunteering with the United Nations in Port-au-Prince Haiti, when a devastating earthquake struck the Caribbean country on January 12th. And whereas Sergeant Gallagher, a husband and father of 2 grown children, was killed when his apartment building in Port-au-Prince was destroyed. And whereas Sergeant Gallagher was viewed by all who knew him as a pleasant, caring, and generous individual, a true humanitarian who always put the needs of others before himself. That is why he volunteered with the United Nations to train police officers in Haiti. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this legislature extend our deepest sympathy to the friends and family of the late Sergeant Gallagher and pay tribute to the officer's memory. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. Okay. A moment of silence. Thank you. The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Extrata Coal has made significant investments to bring coal mining jobs back to Cape Breton Island in a safe working environment and the necessary economic viability, and whereas Extrata has worked continuously with the Government of Nova Scotia, even through some difficult times for world coal prices, to keep developing its operation in Donkin viable. And whereas Extrata has just awarded a contract to Municipal Ready Mix to build a 2.2-kilometre access road to the Donkin mine site at a cost of over $1 million. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House recognize the significant investment and dedication to the Donkin Mine project demonstrated by Extrata Coal and their junior partner from Nova Scotia, Erdine Resources, even in the face of adverse economic conditions, creating much-needed and good jobs in Cape Breton. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of African Nova Scotian Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Black Business Initiative has been creating a dynamic presence within the Nova Scotia business community for close to 15 years, and whereas one of its key components is the Business is Jammin' youth program with a mission that reads, where innovative ideas meet potential for successful development in African Nova Scotian youth, and whereas this provincial charitable initiative focuses on motivating youth through education, entrepreneurship, and personal development programs to instill confidence in business skills. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in congratulating the BBI in its Business is Jamming program as it celebrates its 10th anniversary and wish it future success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. I'm going to recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to draw the members' attention to the West Gallery, where we're joined today by Louise Gillis, who is from Sydney, Nova Scotia. Louise is the second Vice President of the Canadian Council of the Blind, which is a national organization, and she's also Vice President of our Nova Scotia division of that council. It's interesting to note that both those councils, in order to be on the executive, you have to be somebody with vision loss. And Louise has been active and involved for the last 13 years since she lost her eyesight. So I would like to ask the House to welcome Louise and perhaps ask her to rise and receive our warm welcome. Thank you very much, Louise.
I'm going to recognize the honourable member for Inverness also on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction. I would like the members to direct their attention to the gallery opposite, the West Gallery, to recognize Chad Bowie. Chad is the president of the Nova Scotia Young Progressive Conservatives, and he represents the future of good governance in this province. Mr. Speaker.
And I'll recognize the honourable member for Cumberland North on an introduction.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to bring everyone's attention to the West Gallery, where I'd like to introduce Mr. John Eaton, grandson of Cyrus Eaton, industrialist, philanthropist, internationally recognized for his efforts in world peace, and son of Pugwash. John, though now a resident of California, maintains a Nova Scotia connection as chair of the Pugwash Park Commission, including the Thinkers Lodge. In his own right, John is noted for his involvement in the first joint venture between China and the United States Corporation, the Great Wall Sheraton Hotel in Beijing. John, if you stand and accept the Along with John is Mr. Gerald Reid, chairman of the board of CREDA, Cumberland Regional Economic Development Association, and municipal councillor for Cumberland County. Gerald.
We welcome all our guests here this afternoon and hope they enjoyed the proceedings of the House. Introduction of bills. The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 140 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Elections Act.
The honourable member for Hants West begs leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 140 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Elections Act.
Bill 27, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 140 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Elections Act.
Order this bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2002, the Fire Safety Act.
The honourable member for Cumberland South begs leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2002, the Fire Safety Act.
Bill 28, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2002, the Fire Safety Act.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations begs leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Bill 29, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Order this bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Wednesday, April 14th, 2010 is Pink Shirt Anti-Bullying Day, and whereas more than 1,500 schools and countless other workplace and organizations take part in this day in more than 25 countries around the world, and whereas the origins of Pink Shirt Anti-Bullying Day was right here in Nova Scotia at Central Kings Rural High School, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House add their support to this international campaign, which brings awareness to the need of the elimination of bullying, and commend all those who participate in today's events. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice of passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I read the resolution, would I have permission to do an introduction?
Certainly.
Okay. In the West Gallery opposite, I would like to introduce some folks who we may have seen outside earlier today. Angela McLean, Janet Tatry, Betty Murray, and Ted Crockett. They are members, stewards, three of them are stewards of Local 721 and an International Brotherhood of Operating Engineers. And they are here to send a message to this government, and they are here to hear questions in question period. So I'd like the House to give them a warm welcome. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in September 2007, two Kings Central High School students, Travis Price and David Shepard, stood up for a fellow student who had been bullied for wearing pink. And whereas their efforts to stand up against bullying caught worldwide attention and generated momentum for this important cause. And whereas April 14th, 2010 is Anti-Bullying Day across Canada, and events are happening coast to coast in communities and in our schools. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House of Assembly recognize the significance of this movement started by these two young Nova Scotia boys and reaffirm their commitment to eliminating bullying in our society. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate, and I would ask that if resolution is passed, that we would have an item delivered to each member of the House to wear in support of this important day.
Certainly. There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas bullying continues to be a major problem affecting the safety of children everywhere, and whereas in response to the bullying of a Central Kings Royal High School student in 2007, two of his schoolmates, David Shepard and Travis Price, organized an anti-bullying Pink Shirt Day, and whereas the action of Mr. Shepard and Mr. Price went viral, garnering international attention and culminated in the creation of an annual Pink Shirt Anti-Bullying Day, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House recognize Pink Shirt Anti-Bullying Day and the efforts of those who help create an environment of respect that will make our schools, streets and communities safer. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. Any further notices of motion? The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the winners of the 2010 Robert Merritt Awards honoring the best in Nova Scotia theatre were announced in a ceremony at Alderney Landing Theatre in Dartmouth on Monday, March the 29th. And whereas Bill Wood, well known for his work with the comedy group Picnic Face, received the award for Best Supporting Actor for his role as Herman in East of Berlin, produced by 2B Theatre, and whereas Will Perkins was the winner of the award for lighting design, also for work on 2B's East of Berlin, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Bill Wood, Will Perkins, 2B Theatre, and the entire theatrical community of Nova Scotia for their ongoing and much appreciated contributions to the cultural life of this province. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Wendy Lill is a Canadian renowned playwright and writer and former NDP MP, And whereas her radio and podcast drama series Backbencher will be heard throughout North America during April and May 2010 through CBC Radio 1 and Sirius 137, therefore, whereas this story reflects the ethical, physical, and emotional challenges of Nellie Gordon, a Nova Scotia paramedic who unexpectedly wins a seat in Parliament, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulates Wendy Lill for her CBC drama series Backbenchers, recognizes her incredible creative talent and hard work, and thanks her and CBC for another quality Nova Scotian production. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas November 15th, 2009 marked the final run for Captain Terry Clothier on the William G. Ernst, the ferry that connects Hancock Island with Chester. And whereas Mr. Clothier served on the boat for 35 years and is the second-generation captain, having taken over from his father, Mr. James Clothier, and whereas Mr. Terry Clothier is continuing with his love of the water by starting a new career with Metro Transit and the Halifax-Dartmouth ferry system. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates Mr. Clothier on his dedication to his community and wishes him well in his new ventures. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Eastern Kings Chamber of Commerce is the chief advocacy group for more than 300 businesses, organizations, and individuals in Eastern Kings County. And whereas the EKCC held its annual Best of Kings celebration on Wednesday, March the 10th at the Old Orchard Inn in Greenwich. And whereas Casabella Gifts of Wolfville was awarded the prize for Best Gift Shop. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulates the management and staff of Casabella Gifts for their achievement in being named as the Best of Kings in 2010. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Shelburne resident Dick Jinson was named Nova Scotia Volunteer of the Year by the Atlantic Association of Community Business Development Corporations at the AGM and conference in Moncton, New Brunswick on September 16th to the 18th, 2009. And whereas Dick Jinson was volunteer his time by serving for 11 years on the Board of Directors for the Shelburne County CBDC, and whereas Dick Jinson is described as being a strong contributor to the CBDC's work in rural Atlantic Canada, as well as being community-minded and taking an active role in operations at the local level. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulates Shelburne resident Dick Jinson for being named Nova Scotia Volunteer of the Year by the Atlantic Association of Community Business Development Corporation at the AGM conference in Moncton, New Brunswick on September the 16th to the 18th, 2009. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Truro Bible Hill.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Glooscap Heritage Centre provides a rich environment for cultural preservation for the Mi'kmaq people, and whereas the history of the Mi'kmaq has been maintained through the art of oral history, and whereas the Glooscap Heritage Centre has been awarded a $10,000 grant from the province of Nova Scotia for a series of workshops for elders of the Mi'kmaq community to share their unique history and culture with the community through the traditional story circle. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates the Glooscap Heritage Centre and the elders of the Mi'kmaq community of Truro in receiving this funding to help preserve their traditions. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the everyday running of a rural general store takes a lot of hard work, organization, and perseverance, and general stores are one of the cornerstones of many rural communities. And whereas the Mill Village General Store recently changed ownership, with the Queens Association for Supported Living becoming the proud owners, and will officially open their doors in August. And whereas the nonprofit group, which supports people in the community with special needs, will be carrying many local foodstuffs, selling their own Penny Lane products, along with products from other nonprofit groups around the province. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognize Queens Association for Supported Living for taking over the Mill Village General Store and wish them great success when the doors officially open in August. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mrs. Toop's grade 4 class at Tallahassee Community School in Eastern Passage worked very hard to raise money for the Red Cross Haitian Relief Fund, and whereas the class, along with parents and staff volunteers, held a Cookies for Kids cookie sale at recess and lunch in an effort to better the lives of the Haitian people devastated by the massive earthquake, and whereas they raised almost $600 the first day, then cookies were sold during the Lions Bingo and the school's Family Literacy Day, and a total of $1,253.55 funds were raised. Therefore, be it resolved that this Nova Scotia House of Assembly commends Mrs. Toop's grade 4 class at Tallahassee Community School in Eastern Passage for their hard work in raising $1,253.55 for the Red Cross Haitian Relief Fund. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Citadel Sable Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Recycles Contest encourages participation in recycling and composting programs among Nova Scotian youth, and whereas the 2010 contest, which encouraged students to become waste warriors and help Nova Scotia reduce our solid waste, saw over 9,300 entries from 227 schools across the province, and whereas Margaret Michael, a grade 12 student of Citadel High School, was the regional winner of the 10th annual Nova Scotia Recycles Contest and received a scholarship for $1,500, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates Margaret Michael on winning the 10th annual Nova Scotia Recycles Contest and receiving a scholarship of $1,500 for her essay. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Wildwood Cafe in Bridgewater has been recognized by Progress Magazine to be one of the best places to dine in Atlantic Canada. And whereas the owners of the cafe, Mr. Aaron Brown and Miss Maria Gallardo, use organic ingredients purchased from local suppliers in the preparation of their delicious meals, and whereas the Wildwood Cafe has been a great addition to the business mix in the town of Bridgewater and in the wider context is a perfect example of how a vibrant and high-quality eating establishment can help grow and support the local economy. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislative Assembly congratulates Aaron Brown and Maria Gallardo for their dedication, hard work, and their success in obtaining this recognition from Progress Magazine, and wish them continued success in the ensuing years. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of the motion and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the young people of Cumberland North are extraordinary, and whereas 19-year-old Erin McSorley of Amherst recently showed just how extraordinary when she participated in a Habitat for Humanity build as part of ongoing relief efforts in Louisiana in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. And whereas our government is committed to ensuring that we highlight the best and brightest of what Nova Scotia has to offer, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Ms. McSorley on her dedication to the cause of helping victims of Hurricane Katrina and for being an excellent ambassador of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Eastern Kings Chamber of Commerce, or EKCC, is the chief advocacy group for more than 300 businesses, organizations, and individuals in Eastern Kings County, and whereas the EKCC held its annual Best of Kings celebration on Wednesday, March 10th at the Old Orchard Inn in Greenwich, and whereas Beleaf Avita Concept Salon and Spa in Kentville was awarded the prize for Best Hair Salon and Barber, therefore be it resolved that this House congratulates the management and staff of Beleaf Avita Concept Salon and Spa Kentville for their achievement in being named as the Best of Kings in 2010 and acknowledge their exemplary contributions to the Kings County community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move for the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canadian Community Newspaper Association has announced the winners of the Better Newspapers competition, with Lighthouse Publishing of Lunenburg County taking 7 awards to be awarded in Toronto on May 13th, and whereas reporter Paula Levy took top spot for Outstanding Reporter, initiating her feature series, A Reason to Belize, while reporter Robert Hurdle took second place for his Best Historical Story for the 3rd year in a row. And whereas the Bulletin team won first place for the Best Newspaper Promotion in the 3rd year in running, as well as taking awards for Outstanding Community Service, Best Special Section, and General Excellence, as well as being nationally recognized for their community website, southshorenow.com. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Lighthouse Publishing staff for their national recognition by the Canadian Community Newspaper Association and commend Lighthouse Publishing staff on their hard work and commitment to community reporting. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Guysborough County Kids First, in partnership with the recreation departments of the town of Mulgrave and the municipality of the District of St. Mary's, was one of 8 recipients awarded a national project called Mums Making the Move. And whereas the program is sponsored by the Canadian Association of the Advancement of Women in Sport and Physical Activity, And whereas the program will allow for the development and implementation of physical activity and/or sports programs from others who will participate in activities such as Zumba, water aerobics, and weight training while their children are being engaged in child-based programs provided by Kids First. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates Guysborough County Kids First and their partners on being awarded one of the 8 national projects, Moms Making the Move, and wish them the very best as they implement this national program in rural Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Member of Community Services, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas January 1st, 2010 marked the beginning of the 250th anniversary celebrations of the community of Chester Basin, with the launch of a cancelled stamp representing the community. And whereas Glenda Ridden, chairperson of the 250th Anniversary Committee, and her committee have worked many hours and years to make this dream a reality. And whereas each month of the year of 2010, the community will hold a special celebration to recognize the heritage of Chester Basin. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House congratulate Ms. Glenda Ridden and her community on this celebration and hard work. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas John Wall Barger is a poet and writer who lives in the North End of Halifax, and whereas John Wall Barger's first poetry collection, Pain Proof Men, was published by Pamphlet Press in the fall of 2009, and whereas many of the poems in Pain Proof Men evoke images and memories of Halifax, and particularly of the North End of Halifax, both in their closely observed descriptions of people and locations, and in titles such as Cousin's Diner and Storm Night at Gus's Pub. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate John Wall Barger on the publication of Pain Proof Men and express their appreciation of his accomplishments as part of the current flowering of literary, artistic, and musical expression in Halifax's North End. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Shake Harbour resident Edna Nickerson was once again been a driving force behind the success of the Rosalind Nickerson Care Fund Society's annual fundraiser Walk for a Cause on September 25, 2009. And whereas Edna Nickerson, alongside her niece, Shelley Dion, was a founding member of the Rosalind Nickerson Care Fund Society, which was initiated in 2004 to help cancer patients living in the municipality of Barrington and the town of Clarks Harbour financially, emotionally, and spiritually. And whereas Rosalind Nickerson Care Fund Society has raised more than $250,000 since its inception, providing financial assistance to up to $1,000 to 94 local cancer patients to date, as well as other support services and lifelines. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly applauds Shake Harbour resident Edna Nickerson for once again being a driving force behind the success of the Rosalind Nickerson Care Fund Society annual fundraiser Walk for a Cause on September the 25th, 2009. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture on an introduction.
Speaker, I'd like to draw the attention of the House to the East Gallery, where I'd like to introduce a friend and a constituent with the International Union of Operating Engineers from Urbania in Hants County and Hants East, Mr. Donnie Dixon, and I'd like the House to give him a warm welcome.
The Honourable Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Salmon Association has awarded the Affiliate of the Year award to one of their 25 affiliate associations from across the province. And whereas the successful association has worked around repopulating the Medway River by working with the schools in the area in the Fish Friends project, and whereas the association is also working towards the liming of the Medway River, therefore be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognize the Medway River Salmon Association for the award of Affiliate of the Year from the Nova Scotia Salmon Association at their annual general meeting and on their work with the schools and their work with the liming of the Medway River. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas last September, community groups across Canada participated in the Toronto-Dominion Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup through efforts to clean up their local shorelines to beautify and protect their environment. And whereas Second Eastern Passage Scouts, leaders, and volunteers in the Eastern Passage area focused their efforts on cleaning up McCormick's Beach while recording the types of garbage they found for educational purposes. And whereas leader Dan Godden, Scouts Devin Godden, Kyle Walsh, Riley Corrigan, Nathaniel Cinerini, Tyler Manthorn, and parent volunteers Denise Walsh and Tanya Manthorn participated in the cleanup at McCormick's Beach. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly commends Second Eastern Passage Scouts, leaders, and volunteers for participating in the Toronto-Dominion Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup on September 26, 2009, and encourage their efforts to protect our beautiful Nova Scotia environment. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lunenburg Queens Parkinson's Support Group and the Kiwanis Club of Blue Nose Golden Cay have seen over the years a need to collaborate to raise money in support of those suffering from Parkinson's, and whereas together they sponsored the annual Porridge for Parkinson's fundraiser, which was held on March 27th in Bridgewater, and whereas this well-attended and successful event contributed much-needed funds to aid in fighting this debilitating disease, therefore be it resolved that this Assembly acknowledge the hard work expended by the Parkinson's Support Group and the Kiwanis Club of Blue Nose Golden Cay to raise funds for support for Parkinson's research and programs. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas our government is committed to projects that make services more accessible to seniors in our communities, and whereas Amherst Rotary Centennial Park will undergo landscaping and activity-related transformations with the help of a $5,000 age-friendly communities grant that was awarded to the town of Amherst, and whereas the funding will help to construct walking paths, install games tables, provide outdoor exercise units, and upgrade the landscaping at this community park. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the town of Amherst on receiving an age-friendly communities grant so they may continue to upgrade and improve upon the Amherst Rotary Centennial Park. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Eastern Kings Chamber of Commerce, or EKCC, is the chief advocacy group for more than 300 businesses, organizations, and individuals in Eastern Kings County. And whereas the EKCC held its annual Best of Kings celebration on Wednesday, March 10th at the Old Orchard Inn in Greenwich. And whereas Pulsifer's Flowers and Foliage of Kentville was awarded the prize for Best Florist. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates the management and staff of Pulsifer's Flowers and Foliage for their achievement in being named as the Best of Kings in 2010 and acknowledge their exemplary contributions to the Kings County community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the NDP government is committed to giving seniors options to allow them to stay in their homes and communities longer, and whereas Second Story Women's Centre works to enhance women's lives by providing services of education designed to promote personal growth, awareness, and social change, and whereas Second Story Women's Centre applied for and received funding through the Positive Aging Fund grant, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates Second Story Women's Centre on receiving the Positive Aging Fund grant so they may continue to serve people in Lunenburg County and keep seniors active in their community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia's NDP government is committed to making communities strong, and whereas the Eastern Communities Youth Association is a non-profit organization that celebrated its 10th anniversary of incorporation in 2009, and whereas the Eastern Communities Youth Association is using the funding received from the Lighthouses program to create an anti-drug strategy for Eastern Guysborough County by increasing family events and encouraging and rewarding positive behavior. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates the Eastern Communities Youth Association on receiving funding from the Lighthouses program to continue positive programming for the youth of Eastern Guysborough County. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. Orders of the day. Oral question period. The time is now 3:02. We'll go to 4:32. Just a reminder that no electronic equipment to be on during the question period, and to direct all your questions and answers here through the chair. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Last night, after repeated requests, the Deputy Premier, on behalf of the Premier, tabled a document outlining how long taxpayers have been paying his Barrister Society fees and how much they had shelled out. For the record, 2 partial years, 2 full years, at a tune of $9,761.54. But the Premier didn't stop there. The document tabled included the fees paid by former Justice Minister Michael Baker, a man who actually used his skills as a lawyer to perform his job, and who is now deceased. I'm appalled at the decision of this Premier to table that information in the House. So my question to the Premier, could the Premier explain the relevance of tabling that information about a former member of the House, who I should point out is no longer able to defend himself?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was the information that was provided to me to provide to the member. And Mr. Speaker, I think that, of course, the former member, of course, acted honourably. I believe that. And I don't really believe he had anything to defend, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier has suggested several times in this House that he was not the only member to have his Barrister Society fees paid. Now the Premier is trying to compare his behaviour to that of a former Justice Minister. So my question to the Premier is, who advised you to try to shield yourself from criticism by impugning the reputation of a former member of this House who is now deceased?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, you know something, it's just so regrettable that the Leader of the Opposition would take that opportunity to try and...
Come on. Order, please. The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I just think it's unfortunate. You know, the former Minister of Justice, former Minister of Finance was a friend of mine. He was a friend of this House. He acted at all times honourably, in my opinion, including when he extended that benefit to the Leader of the Opposition's office, Mr. Speaker. It was designed to be able to support the people in the constituency who had a real need for services that he knew could be provided. Mr. Speaker, I don't think there was anything that needs to be defended or was any reputation impugned.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have asked the Premier repeatedly to table the information pertaining to the Premier and how long Nova Scotia taxpayers have been paying his Barrister Society fees. No one on this side of the House has questioned the former Minister's integrity. What the Premier did and what his staff has done by tabling that information is tried to shield himself from what the wrath of Nova Scotians. Nova Scotians have seen this to be an inappropriate expense. And what he has attempted to do is shield the criticism that Nova Scotians are directing at him by using that of a deceased member of this House, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the speakers, will you do the responsible thing and the right thing and pay the money back to the people of this province?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the allowance that was extended was used in my office for the purposes of providing services to the people of my constituency, Mr. Speaker. He knows.
Order. The Premier has the floor.
Policy, Mr. Speaker, he knows it.
The Honourable Premier.
And what the Leader of the Opposition knows.
The Honourable Premier has the floor.
What the Leader of the Opposition knows, and what is clear from the document that I tabled, was that it was the practice of the former government for more than a decade, that it was started under the Ham government.
Okay. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is through you to the Premier. Workers at Townsview Estate, like all workers, some of them here today, want fair treatment. Since June of 2009, when an arbitrator ruled that the resident care workers were performing duties equivalent to higher paid positions, the government has done nothing to rectify the situation. So my question to the Speaker is, why has your government failed to correct this wrong?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've had an opportunity to review the decision that was made by the arbitrator. I want the workers here to know that we very much appreciate and value the work that they do. What we do, Mr. Speaker, through the Department of Health is to fund the employer. It is up to the employer to meet the requirements of the collective agreement.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party in your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the International Union of Operating Engineers, now Local 721, explained in a letter to me, which I will table today, that the Deputy Minister of Health had told the union that, and I quote from that letter, "If we cease the phone calls and letter writing and provide the deputy with an argument that would protect government against having to pay all RCWs across the province the same increase, he would fix the problem." End of quote. These residential care workers perform the same tasks and have the same responsibilities as workers in higher paid classifications. So my question to the Premier is this: when will this government agree to pay equity for the residential care workers?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I just already answered that question. The reality is that we fund the employer. as I've said again, we absolutely respect and appreciate the work that is being done, but we are also charged with the responsibility of ensuring that we provide the funds to the employer which they use for the purposes of satisfying the requirements of the collective agreement.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party in your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in a letter dated April 1st, the Deputy Minister of Health, speaking about a standards for care review process, writes, and I quote, "We will only be able to commence the process when we can secure funding for potential increases in costs." So my final supplementary is this. Has the Minister of Health provided the funding necessary to begin the review and to resolve the pay equity issues for the workers at Townsview Estate?
Good question. Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, workers in residential care facilities are not required to be trained as CCAs, and the qualifications of staff in these facilities and the standards of care is something that my department does determine. It is something that we will review, Mr. Speaker, when we are in a position to do that. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development. It is our understanding that an arbitration decision involving 19 resident care workers at Townsview Estates and their union, the IUOE Engineers Local 968, now Local 721, has been sitting on the Minister of Health's desk since last June. The arbitrator agreed that a residential care worker at Townsview was performing the same duties and responsibilities as a nursing assistant at Northwood. Now, this ruling would put into effect a clause in the worker's contract that should have resulted in a rate adjustment increase of $2.91 per hour per worker. My question to the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development: why has the government failed to deliver on an increase that has been legally determined to be rightfully theirs?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Workforce Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Because this is part of the arbitration process, I'm not in a position to be able to comment on the details.
Okay. The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is not part of the process it's been ruled on, so I fail to understand why this very government, if they were sitting on this side of the House right now, they'd be pounding on their desk demanding that those workers get the money that's due. These operating engineers, this is a group of women who have proven they perform duties that are equivalent to a different classification of workers in other facilities, and that makes them unique. One has to wonder if this had been any other union, whether or not those individuals would have had to join us here today to demand that they get the money that an arbitrator has already determined is rightfully there. My question to the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development: why is your government so determined not to provide the necessary resources to Townsview Estates to ensure these women receive their pay adjustment?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Workforce Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My government certainly appreciates that this is a very important issue for these workers, and I think I could commit on behalf of all the relevant departments to sit down with them and discuss what information is public information with them. But certainly this is not the place nor the time to get into negotiation and discussion of those details. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, how things change. My final question is to the Minister of Health. Here's the irony. These women who provide hands-on care actually earn less money than the housekeeping aides and the cooks at Townsview Estates due to a review of their work conducted in the long-term care sector. And this statement is not meant to diminish the work of others, but to make the point that these 19 women finally need to be recognized. These workers have already proven and won an arbitration case. My final question is for the Minister of Health. When will these 19 women finally be recognized by this minister as deserving of the increase awarded to them in arbitration 10 months ago?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I and my department are very much aware of the excellent work done at Townsview Estates by these workers, these 19 residential workers, and in addition to the residential workers in 30 other residential facilities around the province, Mr. Speaker. As I indicated, my department is prepared to undertake a review when we are able to do a review with respect to the qualifications and the standards in residential care, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. The Health Minister, more than any other member of Cabinet, has been charged with a tremendous responsibility, that of curbing the spiraling costs of health care. She has the challenge of ensuring that the investments made today will yield savings in the healthcare system tomorrow. These investments in health must be strategic, but we should not forget that they should also ensure that patients do not experience a negative health outcome as a result of the government doing nothing. Mr. Speaker, my question for the Health Minister is, what is preventing the Health Minister from funding Lucentis? Is it the fact that you can save money, or is it the fact that you don't regard someone's eyesight as a strategic investment?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our government funds about $240 million in drugs through the pharmacare programs. And Mr. Speaker, this is in spite of the fact that today the revenue of the province has literally followed by hundreds of millions of dollars, as the honourable member I know has acknowledged. That scenario has meant that, particularly for numerous new drugs that are coming onto the market, we have to make some very tough choices. And one of the things that this government is committed to do through our drug management policy unit is to work very, very hard to make sure that drugs are affordable for Nova Scotians as we go forward in very challenging financial times, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the government that, when in opposition, spoke out for people who needed government support. But today, things are different. When they're in a position to do something, they are silent. Last week, the minister spoke in this House about the cost of funding Lucentis, but she failed to mention the savings that are also attached to that funding. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, when patients have wet macular degeneration, they lose their sight. It will never come back unless the patient has access to Lucentis. Without treatment, the inevitable blindness will have a crushing impact on a person's quality of life. Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister of Health is, why is it acceptable for more than 90% of Canadians to have access to Lucentis, while Nova Scotians do not have access to this treatment?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I indicated in my earlier response, Mr. Speaker, there are many, many new drugs coming onto the market all the time that offer a better treatment than the last generation of drugs for similar kinds of illnesses and conditions, Mr. Speaker. We weigh very carefully which drugs we are able to afford, and Mr. Speaker, to be able to get the best most affordable drugs into the hands of the province, we are now undertaking several initiatives through a new drug management policy unit, and we will see a reduction in drug costs for Nova Scotians with savings to the taxpayers in years to come, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Timing is of the essence in this issue. Lucentis can save people's eyesight, and it can reverse some of the loss they've already experienced. Mr. Speaker, today I introduced in the gallery Louise Gillis from Sydney, Nova Scotia, and I explained to the members that she is associated with the Canadian Council of the Blind. My question to the minister is, will the minister address Ms. Gillis today and explain why it is acceptable for Nova Scotians to continue to lose their sight as a result of the Dexter government's failure to fund Lucentis?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the honourable member, I would be happy to meet with Ms. Gillis following question period to have a discussion about this very important matter.
The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question today through you is again to the Minister of Health. During the last election campaign, the NDP promised to keep all emergency rooms open all the time. Last April, the Premier introduced an act to keep hospital emergency rooms open, and in June, the member for Shelburne even stated the NDP has a plan to ensure there is emergency room care with appropriate levels of staffing close to home for all Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister, if the NDP tabled legislation and had a plan for ERs, then why are we still seeing hundreds of hours of closures in some ERs around Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member fully well knows, the problem in emergency departments didn't occur overnight, and it won't be solved overnight, Mr. Speaker. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we hired a very capable emergency room physician, Dr. John Ross, whose interim report has been released, Mr. Speaker, and we will be moving forward when Dr. Ross makes his final report. In the meantime, there are a number of measures in the budget that are here in front of us that are designed to realize real improvements, both short and long term, in our emergency rooms, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Argyll on your first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Pugwash from July 1st, 2009 to March 31st. It's been closed 381 hours. Fisherman's in Lunenburg has been closed a grand total of 2,818 hours. Parsboro, 648 hours in that same time period. And I'll table those when I'm done, Mr. Speaker. Okay. Nova Scotians elected your government based upon the pledge to keep ERs open 24/7, and that has not been accomplished yet. And I'll use the Premier's question in a press release that he put out when he was a leader of the opposition, and it says, why doesn't the Minister of Health keep emergency rooms open when public health is such a priority?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm not sure that I heard a question there, Mr. Speaker, but I also didn't hear that we were able to reduce the amount of time that the Glace Bay emergency room was closed by about 50%, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Argyll on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. But like I said, thousands of hours since this NDP government took power. There's been no change. They said to Nova Scotians in the last election that they had all the answers, they had a plan, they would solve it immediately. And that has not happened, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell you they're looking for a way now to start closing some of those emergency rooms in order. The Ross report, Mr. Speaker, is essentially a reprint of the FSOR, or the Provincial Health Services Operational Report. What do you hope that the Ross report will say to enable you to deliver on your promise of no emergency room closures?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I remind the honourable member that Dr. Ross, when asked if any emergency room should close, had a very succinct answer, and his answer was no, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Victoria Day weekend is just around the corner, the traditional start of tourism season in Nova Scotia, including southwestern Nova Scotia. It has now been 4 months since the Premier killed the subsidy to the ferry service between Yarmouth and Maine, and we are still waiting for a transportation study for the area to be released. A study the Premier told this House he would fast-track in the wake of his bad decision to kill the subsidy with no plan for the area. So my question to the Premier, what have you done to fast-track that study?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, in fact, Mr. Speaker, what I actually said was that I would make representations to ACOA to see if that could be fast-tracked. In fact, I made that comment in a scrum along with the Mayor of Yarmouth, who at that time advised me that he was on the subcommittee of that study group and that he felt that it could be done. And of course, we made the appropriate representations to ACOA to ask whether that could be done.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's typical for the Premier to make a promise and then back away from it or point the finger at someone else. But in this case, the province has put money into the study and has 3 members on the group with the job of putting the report together. So my question to the Premier, what steps are you taking to have that report delivered, given how long the people of southwestern Nova Scotia have been waiting for help?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My understanding from the conversations we had with ACOA is that that study is available in draft form. I think it's being communicated already to the committee members, so we're hopeful of having it very soon.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Premier just alluded to, and he knows there's an interim report, and the copy has been circulating through members of that community since early January. He knows how vital that information contained in that study is to the people of Yarmouth and surrounding areas. So again, I'll ask the Premier, what have you done personally to expedite that study with you? And with your own representatives on the working group, and what kind of pressure have you applied to the federal government to ensure that information is out soon?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we're in constant contact with the federal department, ACOA. We have set up Team West. We agreed to co-lead the Southwest Team Southwest Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. All of these are designed to address the issue in Southwest Nova Scotia. But, Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to remind the Leader of the Opposition of the comments of the member from Clare who said in this House, Mr. Speaker, everyone knows that this cat ferry was not viable. That is not a revolutionary statement from government, Mr. Speaker, and I will table that.
Okay, the Honourable member from Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is for the Minister of Health. Constituents of mine, Margaret and Sean McGuinness at Upper Washabuck, Victoria County, have been wanting to get their autistic child into pivotal response training. 9 families needed this training for their children, yet only 3 spots were vacant, so they held a draw. The 9 names were placed into a hat, and 3 winners were chosen. Only because of a recent cancellation have the McGuinnesses been fortunate enough to have their son enrolled in the program. Madam Minister, clearly you must see something wrong with this picture, and today I'm asking you, how are you going to remedy it so all autistic children and their parents needing specialized training will not suffer from what is essentially a lottery draw?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for bringing that question to the House. Mr. Speaker, as all members of this House no doubt are aware, the EIBI therapy that is available to young children with autism is not a program that was established to be able to accommodate all of the children who require it. There is a waiting list. There's been a waiting list for some time, Mr. Speaker. Our party, when we ran in the election in '09, had a piece of our platform that indicated we would fully cover this program in the third year of our mandate. And Mr. Speaker, I will ensure that that in fact does occur. But for the moment, the status quo is in place, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria, the Lakes, and your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, through you again to the Minister of Health. John Ross McGuinness was first diagnosed with what was thought to be autism spectrum disorder in late April last year, before officially finding out on November 17th. His parents and many other parents are seeking answers from this government, which clearly stated in their election brochure last spring that, and I quote, "Each step in the NDP plan means more Nova Scotians can receive care when they need it." I'm aware of 4 other children who lost their lottery draw. But how many other autistic children are still waiting, Madam Minister? How are you going to assist them?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, we still have a wait list for that program. About 70% of the children who require EIBI get access, but Mr. Speaker, that does leave some children on a wait list. And as I indicated, our platform did make a commitment for a Kids First program that would see children with autism have access to this program in year 3 of our mandate. And as I said, it's my commitment that we will fulfill that piece of our platform in year 3.
The honourable member for Victoria, the Lakes, and your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And 3 years is a long time to wait if your child has autism. Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary is through you again to the Minister. Will the Minister now assure me and all families dealing with this serious issue that their children will get the necessary expert help which will assist them in reaching their highest potential? Will the Minister assure me and the parents out there there'll be no more lottery draws?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I don't know if the honourable member was here in the chamber throughout all of the 18 or so hours, or 100 hours, it seems, of health estimates. But one of the things that we have done in the Department of Health is we have pushed money that we have been using in the department out into the districts, and specifically the IWK, for programming around complex cases in autism. I don't know to what extent this will make a difference, but I'm hoping that having more funding closer to the service providers and receivers will in fact result in some improvement, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad for the announcement today for a tuition support program took place today. Now, we know that parents have been waiting a long time to find out whether this program will continue. My question to the Minister, is the program extended indefinitely?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased that the honourable member recognizes that today's announcement was a good news story and answers a lot of questions and anxiety that some parents who are using the tuition support program were facing. What we've decided as a government is that tuition support will recognize that it's a short-term intensive intervention, and after 3 years, it will be expected that those students will transition back to the public school system, or depending on their age and grade level, they may go into a post-secondary placement or even out to work. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, that wasn't quite the question I asked. I was asking whether the program is going to go on indefinitely or whether the program itself will be cut at some point. But today's announcement on TSP limits the program to 3 years with a possible 4th transition year if the child qualifies. Mr. Speaker, TSP is not a choice. We are not talking about parents choosing to send their children to a private school over the public system. The public school system cannot meet the needs of these children at this time. It is a last resort. The TSP is a last resort. And as one parent said today, it's like removing service from a child is like yanking a ramp from a student in a wheelchair. So my question is, why is the minister limiting families who may have further need for the program?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe most people in this chamber recognize that tuition support is just one of many options available to students and families with special needs in this province. Most of them, if not all but tuition support, provided through the public school system. And originally, this program was, I shouldn't say originally, this program was always intended to be a short-term intensive intervention. Originally for 2 years, we've expanded that to 3 years with the possibility of a 4th year if circumstances are exceptional. And every year of that 3 years, it's intended that the designated special education private school will work with the school board and the department to enable a transfer back to the public school system. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear the government is trying to limit the tuition support program. It's very hard for parents to find out about the program and to get the necessary assessment for their children to access it. In fact, we've had previous staff from the Department of Education say, I didn't want to advertise the competition. So I'm just wondering, what plans does the government have to publicize the program now that it's permanent?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All these programs are listed on the Department of Education website, and certainly we did receive some concerns that the application process could be simplified, and we're going to look into that. I think the key message that comes out of today's announcement is that we listen to parents and we listen to educators, and we have a healthy balance between investing public money in the public school system for the majority of students, yet allowing this option for the few families who feel that that is necessary for the best interest of their children. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Angela McLean, Janet Tatry, Ed Crockett, and other members of Local 721 are here today. They are looking for answers. So my question to the Minister of Health is the Minister prepared to meet with these folks before they leave the House today?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and certainly I'm more than happy to do that. In terms of the time frame, it could be a bit of a juggle if they're prepared to stay around. I understand I'm up in debate on a bill after question period.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party in your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that the Minister may be delayed, so my question would be to the Premier. If the Minister is delayed, is the Premier prepared to meet with him immediately after question period?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The most appropriate person for them to meet with would be the Minister. I think the delay will be a short one. I'm sure they're prepared to wait.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I guess I will go to the Minister responsible for Labour Workforce Development because this is an issue. And I want to read from a letter from the Department of Health, which is why I focus my question there, January 27th, to the Administrator at Townsview, which says, and I quote, "The Department of Health will be increasing your funding to reflect the rates with the expectation that these increases will be forwarded to the staff." So my question to the Minister of Health is, to the Minister of Labour Workforce Development is, why have they waited from January and are still waiting without this increase?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Workforce Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have those details. I'd certainly be prepared to get my staff to meet with me and, if appropriate, to meet with the people who are here today. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. You know, Mr. Speaker, it took a question from me and estimates for the Shubenacadie Canal Commission to learn while they were sitting there that they would be denied funding to trigger $1 million from other levels of government. I would add this is on top of the fact the department in the past couple of years also turned down a request for $150,000, which would have triggered equal amounts from rural Nova Scotia municipalities and ACOA, which would have created rural Nova Scotia jobs which have now been lost. It seems as his department has decided that those who act as caretakers of the Shubenacadie waterway, which incidentally provides drinking water to East Hants, irrigation for farmers, active transportation routes, flood control and businesses, is not important, despite the fact that the Commission's record shows that it has turned every dollar in capital money from the province into $3 to $9. And despite the fact they have a staff person on that commission. Now, my question for the minister is, why did his department encourage the commission to expend their limited funds to produce this business plan, which I will table, if they weren't going to work with them to see it implemented?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe when the younger member is an older member, he'll get his facts straight. The 1.5 million he refers to, actually, the HRM has not made any commitment on the 500,000. They'll make a decision 2nd or 3rd of May, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, since the minister can't get his facts right, maybe he should resign, because at a recent council meeting, council in fact passed the approval of that money's contingent on the funding from the province of Nova Scotia, and that is in the record of the minutes of the Halifax Regional Council. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is that yesterday in question period...
Order, please. There's too much chatter in the chamber. The member for Dartmouth East has the floor.
Well, yeah, Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is, yesterday in question period, the Premier suggested that the Commission had never filed an application, and that's why maybe they didn't get the money. Well, the fact is, this is a provincial commission that, since it was instituted in '86, has never had to file applications for capital funds because it was part of the department's business plan. The minister, but the question here is the minister met with the Shubenacadie Canal Commission in the fall and again in March, and the Premier himself sat down with the chair of the commission during the fall session of the legislature. Okay. Both times this was brought up, and neither time did either one of these individuals suggest that they should file an application. So my question for the Premier is, do you think it's reasonable that neither you or your minister suggested to the commission they should file an application to get the money?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my opinion is a fairly straightforward one. If someone wants to get money through a program of government, they should apply for it.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my opinion is quite simple. The fact is, when the minister sat down and the premier sat down with them, maybe he should have said that, since it's a provincial agency that has never had to apply for capital funding before, and he knows that. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is the Commission is required under provincial legislation that I will table now to meet certain obligations for the province of Nova Scotia, yet they have to be funded to do that. I will also table the minutes from estimates the other day where the minister suggested it'll be 3 to 4 years at least before they get any more money. So my question for the Premier is the Premier's message to the volunteers of the Shubenacadie Canal Commission that they should pack up and go home, since his minister says there'll be no funding until the spending spree before the next election?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, the Shubenacadie Canal Commission's been around for a long time. I served on Dartmouth City Council and am well aware of the work that they do, and I am also well aware that it is very valuable work to the community of Dartmouth and in fact, very valuable work for the province. The reality is that we are in very difficult financial times. The member knows that. He knows that we are trying to balance all of the program demands that exist in government, in health, in education, and in heritage and culture. And we're trying to balance those, and we're doing so in a reasonable way. Now, we are continuing with the operational funding for the Shubenacadie Canal Commission. He knows that. We're going to continue to try and address the questions associated with capital funding in a reasonable way. But we do have to balance them because, Mr. Speaker, we need to get the finances of the province back in order, and we do have to live within our means.
The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Health. Many Nova Scotia seniors struggle with age-related macular degeneration, Mr. Speaker, which is the leading cause of blindness in Canada. We all recognize that treating seniors with respect and dignity will allow them to stay in their homes and have a higher quality of life. The drug Lucentis does help stay the progress of age-related macular degeneration. My question to the Minister, are you prepared to make Lucentis a drug covered by the Seniors Pharmacare Program?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as I've said a couple of times now, the government does fund our pharmacare programs to the tune of $240 million, Mr. Speaker. There are new drugs that are coming forward all the time that we have to examine within the context of our ability to pay for these drugs and sustain those payments on a go-forward basis, Mr. Speaker. Lucentis is not included in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker, and we are setting up a drug management policy unit designed to undertake a number of initiatives which will see more affordable drugs for Nova Scotians at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hants West on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP campaigned over the last number of years on a promise to help seniors and that everything would be a utopia promised land under the NDP government for Nova Scotia seniors, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing more broken promises and seniors are left wanting, not waiting, but wanting. Leah Harvey of 3 Mile Plains, who is in need of Lucentis, but has been told that the drug is not covered under the Seniors Pharmacare, is on a fixed income, and her vision is deteriorating, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Minister, what will the Minister do to help people like Ms. Harvey who are facing a frightening prospect of losing their sight today, not after years of committees meeting and trying to decide what the right thing to do is?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, that member is a member of a former government who had hundreds of millions of dollars more in revenue annually than we have to work with, and that government didn't include Lucentis on the formulary, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what we are doing is we are setting up a drug management policy unit designed to realize some initiatives that will result in more affordable drugs for Nova Scotians, and we recognize we see many new drugs coming forward all the time with catastrophic drug costs, Mr. Speaker, that need to be managed.
The honourable member for Hants West on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the NDP, yes, have been in government now for 9 months or so. And part of that minister's duties, as I'm sure she knows, is to review programs and policies to see if they're meeting the needs of Nova Scotians. And Mr. Speaker, they are not. We have an aging population that's only going to grow and grow farther quicker. The cost for seniors who do not receive this drug is purely a financial hardship. $1,000 per treatment every 6 weeks is the cost of this fine lady. Will the minister do the honourable thing and add Lucentis to the list of those drugs covered by the Nova Scotia Seniors Pharmacare Program? $1,000 every 6 weeks. This lady won't be able to eat pretty soon.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my information is that Lucentis costs $2,000 per injection, Mr. Speaker. And I also have been told that the packaging of Lucentis is such that when it's opened, there's a significant amount of wastage in each in each unit, Mr. Speaker. And so we also end up paying for a fair proportion of the drug that never is usable for anyone, Mr. Speaker. However, having said that, Mr. Speaker, Lucentis, like many other new drugs that are coming forward, are very useful treatments for people with particular kinds of conditions. We want to ensure that people are able to have access to these treatments, but we have to be able to do it in a way that is sustainable, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we are setting up the Drug Management Policy Unit, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today is for the Minister of Community Services. Currently, Mr. Speaker, a single-abled individual who is in receipt of income assistance exists on monthly an allowance of $300 for shelter and a personal allowance of $214. So my question today to the Minister is, how much more income on a monthly basis will that individual see in light of the new tax increase coming?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And we're presently in budget estimates, and that's a budget question, and I invite the honourable member to ask me that question during estimates. Thank you.
Okay. The honourable member for Dartmouth North on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay, I'll go to another question. The shelter allowance currently for an individual single able body is $300. It hasn't been increased since 2006 by the Conservative government. I would like to ask a simple question of the Minister. Where, in her opinion, in Nova Scotia, can an individual, able-bodied, looking for employment, in receipt of income assistance, can they find housing on $300 a month?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Where they can find housing, they can come to us. Every case is on an individual matter, and so that's why it's important to encourage people to speak with us, and we will work with them, and we are working diligently towards our housing. We have we'll be investing $128 million through the stimulus package for housing to increase those numbers, and so that's why it's very important for individuals to talk with their caseworkers in order to go further with those type of issues. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, quite simply, the housing money is not going to be enough. There's wait lists around this province that are extensive. So that individual out there trying to struggle and find a job is out of luck with that department. Mr. Speaker, my final question. The Minister hopefully is aware of a policy, 5.7.29, in and around income tax refunds. And as the government is in hopes of helping the burdens of low-income families, I would ask the Minister, is she prepared to deal with this policy which states a 70% income tax clawback in receipt of a refund. Is her government prepared to put that money back in Nova Scotians' pockets so that they can get on the Dexter bus and go for a ride instead of being run over by one?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. One of the important things is to be able to understand that within the last only 9 months that we are moving towards a different system for the Department of Community Services and income assistance. We don't want it to be a last resort. We want it to be a stepping stone, and that's why we've introduced programs like Target 100. That's why we've introduced the Affordable Living Tax Credit, where at the end of the day, the individuals will be actually having $113 a year more in their pockets after they have to pay any increase that we feel would be in the HST. So it takes time, and we've already made some fabulous decisions.
Order, please.
Made some very good decisions in that direction, and we will continue to do that because we have a commitment to all Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Monsieur le Président, hier, pendant la période de questions, le ministre des Affaires acadiennes a répondu à une question de mon collègue de Claire en français. Le fait qu'elle a répondu en français est la première fois qu'un ministre répond en français pendant la période de questions depuis les 12 ans que je suis député. Le problème qui existe est que vous, Monsieur le Président, et la majorité des députés à cette Chambre ne comprennent pas le français. Alors malheureusement, vous ne pouvez pas suivre les échanges qui prennent place en français. Alors ma question au ministre des Affaires acadiennes, est-ce que le ministre propose que les députés acadiens et francophones peuvent maintenant poser des questions dans leur langue maternelle pendant la période des questions?
The Honourable Minister responsible for Acadian Affairs.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je me souviens très bien que le ministre Neil Leblanc a répondu à une question dans la période des questions en français. En tout cas, je ne comprends pas la question parce que le député dit est-ce acceptable de poser une question pendant la période des questions en français? Il vient de le faire.
Oui. The Honourable Member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Monsieur le Président, la communauté acadienne et francophone de la Nouvelle-Écosse a fait plusieurs démarches pour protéger notre langue et notre culture avec la création de l'Université Sainte-Anne, Conseil scolaire acadien provincial et la loi sur les services en français. En même temps, cette Assemblée a reconnu l'importance de la communauté acadienne par reconnaître 3 circonscriptions protégées pour les Acadiens et les Acadiennes, soit les circonscriptions d'Argyle, Clare et Richmond. Pendant que nous sommes permis de nous prononcer dans notre langue maternelle à l'Assemblée, il n'y a aucun système de traduction simultanée pour permettre à nos collègues anglophones de nous comprendre. Alors ma question est, est-ce que le ministre des Affaires acadiennes, qui est aussi le ministre des Finances, peut nous présenter les chiffres qu'il a reçus pour conclure que ça serait trop coûteux pour mettre en place un système de traduction simultanée dans notre Assemblée législative?
The Honourable Minister of Acadian Affairs.
Monsieur le Président, comme le député sait très bien, le processus de cette Assemblée est dans les mains de l'Assemblée. Ce n'est pas ma décision à moi de faire. S'il veut présenter au Conseil de l'économie interne une proposition qu'on étudie les coûts qui seraient impliqués dans une telle proposition, je vais l'appuyer parce que il faut commencer le débat avec des chiffres qu'on peut vérifier. Nous ne sommes pas la première chambre à faire une telle chose. Nous pouvons étudier le Manitoba, le Nouveau-Brunswick et ainsi de suite. Et je serai moi-même très intéressé aux résultats de cette étude.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
Ben, Monsieur le Président, il y a un peu de problème avec ça parce que le ministre des Affaires acadiennes parle des deux bords de sa bouche. Parce que hier soir, à l'émission de SRC, le ministre des Affaires acadiennes a dit, et je répète, le ministre des Finances coupe court à cet espoir en évoquant la manque d'argent dans les coffres de la province. Nous ne sommes pas dans la position d'ajouter aux dépenses de l'Assemblée pour l'instant, indique le ministre des Finances. Alors, Monsieur le Président, aujourd'hui, le ministre nous dit qu'il est prêt à étudier cette question. Mais hier soir, il s'est prononcé qu'il n'était pas paré d'augmenter les dépenses de l'Assemblée. Qui me fait poser la question, c'est qui est responsable pour cette Assemblée? Vous, le Président, ou bien le ministre des Finances, quand il s'est prononcé en disant ça? Alors, je demande la question encore. Est-ce que le ministre des Finances, qui est le ministre des Affaires acadiennes, est prêt de travailler avec tous les députés acadiens et anglophones pour mettre en place un système de traduction simultanée ici en Nouvelle-Écosse?
The Honourable Minister of Acadian Affairs.
Speaker, I know many members of the House won't understand what the honourable member just said, but they can see that he's very worked up about it. Après une soirée de considération, Monsieur le Président, je crois que oui, j'accepte que j'ai parlé un peu trop vite. Ce n'est pas ma décision, moi, c'est la décision de l'Assemblée. Mais il ne faut pas sous-estimer le coût d'une telle proposition. C'est faire la traduction simultanée, monsieur, c'est une profession qui requiert beaucoup de formation. Ça va coûter cher, mais si on va couper ailleurs dans les dépenses de l'Assemblée, c'est quelque chose qu'avec mon chapeau de ministre des Finances, peut-être je peux appuyer.
Merci. The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais beaucoup continuer sur cette question-là, but I need to ask a question in health, so I'm going to ask the question in English, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Last April, the former Progressive Conservative government made an announcement